OK52NU presents 50 Years Behind the Microphone, a salute to Bob Berry Sr. Hosted by OK Sports Rap's Brian Birchall.
25-30, 25-20, 15-10, 5, touchdown Oklahoma! Unbelievable!
For 50 years, Bob Berry Sr. has been the voice of football in the state of Oklahoma. He's called games at OU, OSU, and even Tulsa. I sat down recently to talk with the legend of play-by-play about his memories, his career, and his soon upcoming retirement. Here's what we got. Bob, several years now you've been calling football and basketball for the University of Oklahoma. Let's start first with the decision to finally retire. When and why did you make the choice to make this your final season with the university?
Well, I started 50 years ago in doing Division I football and basketball. Bud Wilkinson, after a tryout, named me the play-by-play guy, which is the biggest thrill you can imagine, yeah. The man. Over the years, of course, I love what I do, and to be doing play-by-play, I've always wanted to do play-by-play, and on the radio, I much prefer that to TV as far as play-by-play. So that's a long answer, but over the years, you know, you get some criticism and some praise for your work. And I tell young people, if you can't stand the criticism, get out of the business, because there's some people who are going to think you're the world's greatest, and others think you're the world's worst. Well, as the years went by and did Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, and this last time with OU from, it's 1993, I think, till now, you know, as the years went on, you realize that you're getting older, and your eyes aren't quite as sharp, and you're not quite as sharp overall. I'll be 80 in February of this month, and so it's just, it's for the last couple, 3 years I've been thinking, it's time to start thinking about hanging them up.
Every time I see him, he tells me the same joke he's told me for the last 20 years, and I still laugh because it's coming from him. But he's just a special guy, and I'm going to miss him.
You've got a couple months left of basketball here, but what do you do next? What happens for Bob Berry Sr. now that you won't be involved with OU as much, maybe?
Well, they were very nice at OU to tell me they want me to continue to be involved in some way. Whatever they want is fine with me, or nothing. I mean, I will still go to the games and hopefully sit in the press box. But no, nothing is planned per se at this moment. And if nothing works out, that's fine as well, because I retired from Channel 4, you know, a couple, 3 years ago. So I'm sort of used to sitting there and watching my giant TV. And and really no big plans other than I'm going to rejoin the Rotary Club, which I was a member for several years, president a couple of years ago, way back.
How did you originally get into the business of broadcasting? I know you did some radio and you've done TV for several years. How did it all start for you? Well,
this is a wild story, but I lied to my father when I was 7 years old. We're talking 1938.
Wow.
And I won't go into what I lied about, some minor deal. And he knew that I lied, and I knew that he knew I lied. But I, for some reason at age 7, was stubborn and wouldn't admit it. So he told me, go upstairs without any dinner until you're man enough to come down and tell me, admit that you lied to me, because I know you did. So I went upstairs, and remember, this is way before air conditioning. Yeah. So the windows were open. It was summer, June, and I was crying. My grandmother said, go down and tell him you lied, you know, so forth, take your medicine. Well, I was crying, and my mother was out painting the swing. I promise this is the answer. She was painting the swing, and I was crying. I leaned against the screen. It opened, and I fell 2 stories head first on a concrete porch.
Wow.
And I bled through every orifice, nose, mouth, eyes, ears. And I actually, if I can kind of remember to this day, riding in the back of the car across the lap of my grandmother and mother, and they were crying, and Dad was driving like bad out of you-know-where and to the hospital. And they wrapped my head in bandages, and the only treatment was to stay in bed with my head on the pillow for 8 weeks.
Wow.
Here's a 7-year-old kid. So what is there to do? You know, television. What do? You listen to the radio. Well, I became enamored with the radio, the programs they had in those days. I would write the actors and get their pictures and autographed, and of course listen to Bill Stern and some of the old-time radio guys, Kurt Gowdy and all of them, do play-by-play, and I just became enamored with that. And finally, when I got well, and by the way, we were worried about brain damage, and there might have been but when I got well, I had a little game board where I could throw dice, and it was a baseball game. I've always loved baseball. And I'd do my own play-by-play after hearing it on the radio. And I know this sounds silly, but and I'd said, you know, the windows were all open. The neighbors called us crazy because I had the base hit the left field, you know, and then roll the dice and whatever. And then I'd print up a little newspaper on typewriter or whatever of how my game came out and put it on my dad's highboy. So when he came home, for a while he thought this was kind of cute, and then he thought, this guy has a problem. So anyway, that really is the genesis of the interest. I never lost the desire.
When you started at OU, you were working for Norman High School, and Bud Wilkinson's sons were there, and you were handpicked by him to become the play-by-play guy. What was that moment like for you to have such a legendary coach and a great coach pick you?
Unbelievable, just unbelievable. There were 14 of us that tried out in the spring game of the OU. That used to be a real game, by the way, in those days. The NFL guys, former Sooners, could really play football. And it was, when there were 14 hours, we'd sit in various booths and record a quarter of the game. But when he called, I think it was his assistant actually called and said, Bud has chosen you as the play-by-play guy. I just immediately called my father and told him, Dad, guess what, you know, you can just imagine I was 30 years old, 29 or 30, and just to be the voice of the Sooners and Bud Wilkinson picking you, just overwhelming.
Everybody loved Bud Wilkinson. Bud Wilkinson represented then and still does represent today excellence in college sports, excellence in college athletics, and college coaching, college football. And so when that job opened, and Bob was one of the many guys who applied for it and recorded play-by-play of the spring game, and then Bud called him and said, Bob, you're my choice, you're the man. Bob was just thrilled, and I just can imagine what he was going through when Bud called him to tell him that he was Bud's choice. And working with Bob literally has been a dream come true. I never dreamed that it'd be for 20 years. I just always approached it 1 year at a time.
Bob was such a nice and friendly guy and helpful. Never had an unkind word for anyone, and of course his play-by-play career was something I was very envious of and very appreciative of. Back before every game was on television, you know, you actually did sit by the radio because that was your connection to Oklahoma football, especially when they were playing a road game. And so, you know, the state would be mesmerized on a Saturday afternoon in the 1970s listening to Bob Berry call either Oklahoma or Oklahoma State, whatever the case may be.
What was it like working with Bud Wilkinson? He's a legend for Oklahoma.
Well, in those days, they had, after games, home games, he would invite writers out to his house. And so I even got invited to his house. And I remember standing in his kitchen after an OU home game, and here was Howard Cosell, Red Smith, big writer of the New York Times, and other guys that I'd heard of. And I'll tell you, Brian, I'm just, you know, gaga-eyed. And that's just the way it was. And Bud had an aura about him of sort of the king, you know. He was a nice guy and very pleasant to everybody, but people, you know, he walked down the campus and everybody just had a tremendous star appeal to everybody.
You switched to Oklahoma State, as you've told us, with because the Gaylord family and Channel 4 and all those kind of things. What was it like for the switch to Oklahoma State? Was it a tough switch for you?
Well, it was unusual because it was a business situation. Mr. Gaylord owned Channel 4 and WKY Radio at that time, and that's who had the OU rights, and they lost the rights to KTOK. And the people at KTOK wanted Jack Ogle and I to keep doing the games for them, and we made a deal. And then I got the word that Mr. Gaylord said, you're not going to do games for my competitor unless you want to quit your job, daytime job, and that's when my wife said, you're not quitting your daytime job. And then, so when that occurred, Floyd Gass at Oklahoma State was nice enough to call and say, we'd like for you to do our games.
Now, you were blessed because Oklahoma State now has a very good team, but for a while they weren't as great, but you were there for a couple of the better years in the late 80s. You saw some guys like Barry Sanders, Hartley Dykes, Mike Gundy. What was it like to call the games for those great players?
I'll tell you, Barry Sanders, in my mind, is the greatest running back I ever got to broadcast. Of course, Billy Sims at OU and Elvis Peacock and a bunch of others. But Barry Sanders was, I think, #1. He was fantastic. What a great running back. And Thurman Thomas and Hartley Dykes, who got 5 schools on probation, as I've mentioned before. But no, it was great, and they were all they just took me in, you know. There was very little of this, what's this Sooner doing our games for, you know. People were treated me great, and I have many friends up there to this day. Got to do a game in Tokyo at the Tokyo Dome. You know, OSU played Texas Tech there, and lots of trips to Hawaii for basketball. So I just, that was my profession, you know.
Talk a little bit about Barry Sanders. What's maybe your favorite call of a Barry Sanders run? You know, had several record-breaking games. And
yeah, Brian, there's so many that the guy was just phenomenal, you know. It's hard to describe, really, because lots of times he would be bottled up and come out of there somewhere or another. Just had all the talent in the world, speed. He was elusive, and I can tell you a little funny story that happened over in Tokyo. What happened, the Japanese over there had this promotion every year to bring 2 college teams over. So we were on a 747 airplane with the Texas Tech people, players, and officials on one side of the plane, 747. The OSU people plays on the other side. And I was sitting right kind of in the middle section there, and right next to the quarterback for Texas Tech, as a matter of fact. Anyway, and they also had the Miami Dolphin cheerleaders, pardon me, and the Grambling Band.
Okay.
That's all who the people in Japan had hired to come over there. So we go to the Tokyo Dome, and this was the time that Barry Sanders was about to break the national record. This is the year he won the Heisman. So Dr. Boger, the president of OSU Emeritus, he had retired, was there, and he kept stats for me because we didn't have much of a crew. They couldn't afford to send all of them over there. And during the run by Sanders, one of the runs, Dr. Boger says in my ear, "That's it, he set the record." Well, ESPN was listening to our broadcast because this was about 2:30 a.m. in the morning, American time, you know. And so I said, "And that's it, he breaks the record." About that time, Dr. Boger says, "Wait a minute, I added wrong." So I teased him afterward and said, "You're a president emeritus and you can't add." You know, of course, joking, obviously, but that was quite a day. And then that was when he won the Heisman, and we got to visit the CBS studio over in Tokyo, which was a little tiny makeshift deal, and Barry Sanders really didn't want to accept the Heisman.
Wow.
That's hard to believe, but that's the truth. You know, why did he quit the Detroit Lions? He could have broken the all-time rushing record. That was just Barry, but OSU kind of had to talk him into taking the Heisman. You know,
it's incredible.
It really is.
So while you were at Oklahoma State, Oklahoma was going through a lot of success in the Switzer years, and you missed those years. But did you concentrate on Oklahoma while you were at Oklahoma State? Did you enjoy some of that maybe from afar, and even calling the Switzer games as an OSU broadcaster?
Right, absolutely. You know, you think you're professional enough, and I hope I have been, to treat both sides equally. But you know, whoever's paying the bills, you lean a little bit that way, obviously. You know, so that's what you said is exactly right. I missed all the Switzer years, but there were some battles, and that Oklahoma State upset OSU OU a couple of times there during that time.
As an original OU fan, although you were calling games for OSU, were you able to maybe enjoy some of the Switzer years, maybe on your day off? And what were your thoughts of Barry Switzer?
He's fantastic. He's just one of the greatest coaches of all time, and a great person, kind person. He just helped so many people. I think he's just terrific. I'm a real Barry Switzer fan.
I've always thought Bob was the voice of Oklahoma football. I mean, who wouldn't? And you know, when it's basketball or football, anyone turning into OU sports for those two sports is going to hear Bob Barry, and that's who they associate OU football, basketball with. I'd just become head coach, and I'd gone to Bob, and I said, "Bob, you know, I've talked to the regents, and they're going to allow me we're not going to put this out for bid anymore, the OU highlights or the OU playback," and which he and Jack Ogle have been doing. And I said, "I need this for recruiting." And of course, that was taken away from them. So I had to go produce my own show. But I told them I had to have it because of recruiting. And Bob comes back to me a few days later and says, "I'd like to do the show with you." I said, "What position you want to coach?" So we had a good laugh about that.
Bob's got a lot of personality. If you're around town playing fundraising golf tournaments, charity golf tournaments, you'll see Bob. He's been a big golfer over the years. I've been with him in a number of charity golf tournaments. A lot of fun to be with, great personality, easy to meet. never met a stranger in his life. And so for a kid who grew up being a kid out there in the suburbs, later on being mayor, I was thrilled to meet Bob Berry.
A couple other Heisman Trophy winners you had the privilege of announcing, Steve Owens, Sam Bradford. Talk a little about those two players and what they've meant to you in your career.
Well, Steve Owens and I have become good friends over the years. Steve is just, you know, five-star person. He's just wonderful. Great guy, good friend, has done a lot just to help me, you know, and so forth.
1 o'clock each Saturday, I'd go back to the storeroom, and I had this transistor radio, and I'd tune it in to the Sooner games. And I'd listen to Bob Berry, Jack Ogle, and that was my first connection to Oklahoma football. We hit it off from the beginning, but I think if you talk to any player that played here, Bob is part of the family, you know. I think in my lifetime I've met so many great people, you know, and I have to say he's up there. He's one of the greatest ever, you know. I mean, he's family. I mean, he's a legend, and I'm just so honored to have him as a friend. And we've been friends, you know, it's approaching 50 years. So he's special to me.
Sam Bradford, I really didn't get to know him at all. It seems as though, maybe it's because of my advancing age, but I'm not as close to the players this day and age as I was back when I was much younger.
So in your earlier years, you were close to the players, you spoke with them on a regular basis, these kind of things?
It just seemed like, I don't know why that happened, but things change, you know, over the years a little bit, and you're the media and they're the players, and there's that petition there that I'm sure you and everyone else in the media has seen. But no, the players are, by all the coaches they've worked for that I've worked for, are taught to be courteous and kind. I don't mean they weren't that at all, but you just don't get to be close buddies as much now.
Coach Stoops won his 7th Big 12 championship. You've called all of them. What's it been like to work with him, for him, announce his games? What's he like?
I think Bob Stoops is a tremendous coach. He is not one to jump at things. You know, he analyzes everything. I think he's real analytical. He realizes what the task at hand is. He's just a great general. We're very fortunate to have him at OU.
The game was Oklahoma winning by 3 points over Nebraska. Maybe a fitting way to end the Big 12. These are two old Big 8 rivals. You're going out, same year OU-Nebraska rivalry goes out. What is your favorite memory of an OU-Nebraska game?
Well, the game of the century, without question, 71. But that's because there were 2 weeks before the game was played that both teams were idle, and they were ranked 1 and 2 in the nation, and both undefeated. I mean, you couldn't draw it out any better. And so there was tremendous hype nationally for that game, and there was clipping on Rogers' return, by the way. No, really, in this day and age, they would have called it a block in the back. Yeah. Because you can see the guy pushing. I don't know whether that's clipping those days or not, but anyway, I've met Rogers and kidded him about it, so he's real good about it.
Have you ever had to miss a game, a broadcast, for any reason in your 50 years?
Well, I've lost my voice twice during games in recent years, but never, I don't think I've ever missed a game because of illness.
How many years have you been doing both football and basketball for the universities?
Well, I think I did. I didn't do basketball at first for OU, but this time around I've been doing it since '73, and OSU I think I did it from the outset. So that was 70. Let's see.
That's
61 to
72.
72, and
so
then
73 to wow.
73.
So for over 30 years.
Yeah, a lot of basketball games.
That's a lot of games. I mean, that's probably 1,500 games in your career. Have you ever stopped to think about how many play-by-play games that is exactly?
Yeah, I think someone figured that up, and that's pretty close. 1,500.
That's amazing. What's maybe the most memorable experience in those 1,500? Is there one moment, maybe a play or a game, or just one moment that stands out to you as this was the best day of my job in either sport?
Well, Brian, there are several. You know, it's hard to pick one out. Like you say, the game of the century, OU-Nebraska, that's one of the all-timers, and guys like Steve Owens carrying the ball 56 times against OSU, you know, and then Barry Sanders and Thurman Thomas, Mike Gundy. I told Mike Gundy recently, I said, I broadcast every game you played at quarterback for OSU. He came in as a true freshman at halftime. Coach made a change at halftime, and put Mike in there, and he is a terrific person, a great coach. I think they're going to do very well, continue to.
Are you surprised that he's had the success he's had this quickly at Oklahoma State?
Not really.
Why not?
Because he's so sharp. He's just really a solid person, and it's a great family. Cale and I know his parents, and actually, not really, but I was with, when I was doing Oklahoma State, OSU was playing at Colorado, and I was on the plane with the Gundys, Mr. and Mrs., plus Cale, who was still in high school. And then, of course, Mike was playing for OSU. So, in effect, we were kind of trying to recruit Cale to OSU. I wouldn't say I was helping recruit, but I, of course, had no idea I was going to go back to OU, so I was sort of hoping he would go to OSU.
And he ended up going to OU, and you ended up being there, so it all worked out for you at least.
It's amazing.
When I was young, I can remember watching the news, being 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old with my mom and dad, if they let me stay up that late at night, and Big Bob Berry was on the sports. And it was a thrill for me when I got to Oklahoma State, and he was announcing games then, so it was pretty special. You just don't replace a guy like Bob Berry. What he stood for and the type of work that he's done for 50 years is irreplaceable.
Bob is the ultimate gentleman. You know, in the 3 decades that I worked with him here, I can count on one hand the number of times I saw him actually get angry. He just never let things upset him. He's kind of like a grown man's body, but with a kid inside. And that's just his whole attitude about life.
You've obviously had a long career at Channel 4. Right. Your son, Bob Jr., or we call him Bob Jr., he's not actually a junior.
Not really a junior.
Yeah, that's right. He worked with you at Channel 4. What was that like to share sports as a passion with him, not just through childhood, but obviously through adulthood and those sort of things?
You know, growing up, my elder son, whom we call Elderberry, Frank, is a school teacher and a musician, and I played professionally music for years. Wow. That's the way I put my kids through college. I played what we used to call a dance band. I played drums, and Frank, my elder son, is a drummer and plays guitar and piano. He has 2 groups. And he can be reached by calling no. But he's a school teacher as well. And Bobby has the personality, it's more like mine, I think, outgoing, and not that Frank's a dud there either, but I've often said that Frank got the music and Bobby got the blab, as far as hereditary things are concerned. But Bobby has developed, he just has a confidence about him, like you do, and people in the business that he was just kind of made for this business. I think he does an excellent job, and he's approached it the right way.
What was it like getting to work with him every day? I mean, hand in hand for a lot of years. I know he went to Wichita Falls first, but eventually you guys worked at the same station. What was that experience like for you?
It was really great. There was no argument necessarily. I was the boss, and he better know that.
My dad and I got to see each other in situations normal fathers and sons wouldn't see each other in. Like I said, you know, the pressures of the business, deadlines, good times, bad times. So that was interesting. So I think we bonded. We got closer together because of that. And then to be co-workers, I always took it when I got hired by him as, you know, people were like, you're working for your dad, you got to get in on the easy road. Well, he might have cracked a door, and no doubt he did, but it still was my job to keep that job, you know, and so I was able to do that. But then I was, to feed my ego, I was like, I just got hired by the best sportscaster in the history of this state, and he chose me to hire me. So that was how I kind of justified my, you know, validated my employment. So that part of it was just a blast to learn from him. I still learn from him. He calls 2 or 3 times a week to talk about my shows that he watches, and he's obviously overly positive sometimes, but when he has a criticism, usually it's right on, you know, and if you don't listen to him, you're foolish. So that bonding was just phenomenal, working with the best sportscaster this state's ever known, 3 Halls of Fame, 15-time Sportscaster of the Year, to learn so much from him. I really tried to soak that in, as I did when I was a little kid.
I didn't know that you were a musician and you put your kids through college. There may be a lot of people that don't know that. Talk about that side of you and being the musician and putting your kids through college.
Well, my dad played piano by ear and played ragtime. Guys, you're young, probably don't know what ragtime is, but the old ragtime music. And one Christmas, Dad bought me a set of drums. And I learned later, he did it just to see if I had any rhythm, which I did, and I still do.
There you go.
So he played piano, and he taught me how to do some licks on the trap drums, you know, with cymbal and the wood block and all that stuff. And along came World War II years later, and we played for the workers out at Tinker Air Force Base that were building airplanes. We'd play during their lunch hour for free, of course, just trying to help the war effort, and played for high school assemblies. Dad playing piano, he could get all over that piano, and I'd play the drums. And so then when I grew up older than that, joined the Musicians Union, played professionally in big bands where, you know, you'd have 3 trumpets, 2 trombones, and sax section and rhythm. And then a class in high school, we had a band, a dance band. As a matter of fact, it was 7th Hour. So I had a great deal of experience there playing in dance bands and with my dad.
What's the craziest story that's happened to you on air during the middle of the game and it was just kind of those what's going on here moments?
Well, I think maybe you have or you will experience this where something great is happening and the thing goes out for some reason, you know. You want to blame somebody, so you blame the engineer. But no, I don't remember any specific, but sometimes on big plays. And of course, when I lost my voice at the halftime of a Kansas game, I have a very strong voice. The good Lord gave me a strong voice. But I was taking a cold, and I sort of knew when the day started, boy, I'm on thin ice. Yeah. And at halftime, with the pause, they were doing color in the halftime, I thought, it's gone. I couldn't utter a sound. And Mark Rogers came up, he was our sideline person. Yeah. He came up and did the second half and just did a great job. And then lost it later. As a matter of fact, I met when OSU played in the Gator Bowl. Mike Gundy was quarterbacking against Clemson, I believe, or South Carolina. Can't remember who. And guess who I met during that day? Who? Howard Schnellenberger was doing color for the Mutual Radio Network. Okay. And I met him. Well, that game, I completely lost my voice. Just couldn't even utter a sound. And we had to struggle through there, and I was trying my best to talk, but those are the only 2 times, knock on wood, that I've ever totally lost my voice.
And staying in the booth, there's a lot of preparation that goes into these broadcasts, players' names, you know, your team as long as the other team. I know you have help, but how do you go about preparing for a broadcast, football and basketball? Well, you have spotter boards. Of course, now, the modern era, they use computers. And I go around the league last couple of years, and everybody says, I want to see your boards. Everybody said, because that's 1890 type deal. Yeah. What it is, I started off years ago making a card for every player. Okay. Every player. Then you put them in the depth chart. For example, this guy's first team, this guy's second, and you line them up in the line and the backs in sort of an order on a board. And then I have spotters. Used to have 2 spotters, one for home team, one for the, and they help you pick out who made the tackle and so forth because you can't see everything at once. Yeah. And I still use that same system. Merv Johnson, you've been working with him for several years now, former OU coach. Just talk about him and what it's been like to work with him and a guy who knows so much about football. That's exactly right. Merv is just amazing. He has a great temperament for being a color commentator on the play-by-play because he knows it, as you said. You know, he knows if Joe Spivas is supposed to block this way and he goes that way. He knows that because he's watching practice every day. Plus, he coached the offensive line for years, you know. So he's so knowledgeable. In my view, a color commentator should be that type of person and not some guy that's trying to be the big star or something, you know. He's a guy that knows what he's talking about. And Jack Ogle, even though he wasn't a coach, whom I worked with for years, was also very good at analyzing things and really informing the listeners of what was going on.
He's a very, very good friend. He's one of the most loyal, likable guys that you've ever met in your life, a guy you'd pick to be a friend. He's got a lot of wit and humor about him. Of course, having done what he's done for over 50 years, he's got some great stories. I love to hear him tell them. As I told him the other day, I said, I want to come over to your house and watch some football games with you. I said, we may be eating chips and sitting in our underwear, but we're going to watch some football games, so I don't plan to not hear him. You called the football game after JFK was assassinated. Yeah, 63. Talk about that experience and what happened to decide whether the game was going to be played or not, and then, you know, broadcasting a game on such a sad day, I'm sure. Well, this sounds like I'm really making this up, but this, of all the years, all these 50 years I've been doing Division I football and basketball, the only time that we had to drive instead of fly was the day that Kennedy was assassinated, 1963, a Friday. The pilot called us. In those days, we didn't fly with the team. Now we fly with the team. We flew in a little single-engine airplane, or twin-engine.
Anyway, the pilot called and said, the weather is not good and I don't want to fly in this weather. So Mr. Morgan, who was running the thing at the time, running the network, said we'll just have to drive to Lincoln. So we drive up the Kansas Turnpike, go in for lunch, they're on the turnpike, come back, turn on the radio in the car, and the president had been assassinated. And then we continued to go on to Lincoln, and the word there was they were trying to decide whether to play the game or not. Well, Nebraska is the only state in the union with a unicameral legislature. Okay. They have a House but no Senate. And so Bud, we learned later, called Bobby Kennedy. See, Bud was President Kennedy's fitness director nationally. Really? That was, I don't think our president's had one since then, but he was the national fitness director, Bud was, because he and Jack Kennedy were very close. So, but he knew Bobby Kennedy, the president's brother, and Bud talked to Bobby, and Bobby told Bud that he thinks the president would want the game to go ahead and be played, and the Nebraska legislature, House, agreed, as Nebraska University did, so the game was played up in Lincoln, and it was really a weird feeling because we told our affiliate stations on the Center Network that we were not going to play any commercials. And during the commercial breaks, during timeouts, we were going to play funeral music, organ music. Yeah. And if they wanted to play their local commercials, that's up to them, but we're not going to play any commercial. And the Nebraska OU series was big, but not nearly as big as it is now in those days. Yeah. And there were probably 40,000 people there, and Nebraska Stadium was much smaller. And it was just an eerie feeling to do that game because it just didn't, you know, the pit of your stomach, you knew things weren't right.
Several years later, many years later, September 11th happened. You called the first OU football game after that. Talk about that experience. I know that we had to wait a weekend for college football, but what was it like when that happened? Well, it was kind of a similar feeling, a little bit more, how do I feel? You know, you didn't feel like the Kennedy thing where there was an attack, but the attack was on as far as September 11th, because there was a completely different feeling there. You know, it's just a situation where are we going to go to war or what's the deal, you know, so that was much different. What's it like to be calling a football game when you realize how small and insignificant that football game really is as opposed to what's going on nationally with our country? Well, the thing about it is I think you have to approach every game, high school, grade school, you're the only game in town. I mean, that's if you sit there thinking, boy, why am I doing this lousy little game for? I mean, I don't think that's the attitude you have to have. You have to have the attitude, this is important to a lot of people and it's important to me and fun and let's do it.
He is an institution in Oklahoma. Play-by-play it's a rare talent. A lot of guys are good in front of the camera. They might be good on a talk show, but they can't do play-by-play. But Bob Sr. has done it, and he's done it well, going back to the days with Jack Ogle. Loved him with Jack Ogle back in the 60s. And then now with Merv Johnson, I think Bob and Merv were a great team together. His voice is the voice of OU football. I mean, that's what I learned was Bob Sr. counting down, you know, 35, 30, 25, 20, 15, 10, 5, touchdown Oklahoma. That is Bob Berry Sr. And I think that whoever tries to replace him as play-by-play man at OU has his hands full.
And on the right side, man in motion, Murray, pass in the end zone, touchdown Oklahoma! Brian Broyles from the near side. Landry Jones from the 8 in Oklahoma State territory. Fake to Murray, pass in the end zone, touchdown! There was Kenny who made the catch. Back-to-back Cameron Kenny. Pass receptions and the second one for a touchdown.
OU or any of their opponents, what was the best football team you ever saw play?
Not Oklahoma, you mean?
Either one. It could be an Oklahoma team or another one, or both.
I hadn't thought about that. Well, some of Bud's teams were incredible for their time. You know, you have to think about the time. And not a team just pops out at me. I'm sorry about that, but there have been several, you know, after 50 years, hard to pick out one or two.
Would you say some of these Stoops teams, the 2000 National Championship team, the team that averaged 60 points a game, it seemed like
that was a great year. I'm glad you brought that up.
Were those two teams, I guess you could compare as good as anyone. What's the difference in football between now and it was in Bud Wilkinson's era, and who wins that football game?
Totally different because you know, the two-way players kind of were in those days.
Yeah.
Back in Bud's early days, played both offense and defense. As a matter of fact, Oklahoma A&M played St. Mary's in, I believe it was the Sugar Bowl, way back when players went both ways.
Yeah.
And Bob Fenimore was the great player for Oklahoma A&M.
Yeah.
And Herman Wiedemeyer was a great player for St. Mary's. Squirmin' Herman Wiedemeyer, they called him. Okay, they were playing both ways. Both the running backs, Fenimore and Wiedemeyer, would play running back from the single wing on offense and linebacker on defense. So in other words, if I'm Bob Fenimore and you're Herman Wiedemeyer, you can nail me when I run with the ball, and then when they get the ball, I can nail you.
Yeah.
So it was kind of fun in those days when players went both ways, played offense and defense.
Landry Jones in the shotgun, gets the snap. Four-man rush, looks to pass, throws it upfield. Caught by Kenny at the 35-40, 45-50, down the sideline, 45-40, 35-30, 25-20, 15, 10, 5, touchdown, Oklahoma! Cameron Kenny. Same formation, the turn. Back to pass, throws it downfield. Hanna caught the 45-50, 45-40, 35-30, 25-20, 15-10-5. Touchdown, Oklahoma! Unbelievable! Great call that time. 77 yards. Unbelievable.
I've been here 30 or 40 years and look over there on the sideline and see at a basketball game, you see Bob calling it, or you turn your radio on, be out in the world working a show somewhere and turn your radio on and pick up the Sooner broadcast and hear that voice. It's just a very familiar ring to it. I've been in Afghanistan and Iraq and picked it up on the internet, listened to games, and heard that great voice.
We talk a lot about football, and that's a lot of your life, but basketball also you've done a lot, and Oklahoma's had a lot of success in basketball. Been to a couple Final Fours while you were there. What's it like to broadcast a Final Four basketball game?
Oh, it's just great. Basketball has it down. You know, I mean, they have everything. They can play so many more games than football can. That's why a playoff works in basketball. A playoff in football does not work, I don't think. I'm a proponent of the BCS. Football playoff, don't get me started.
Yeah.
But basketball, because of the number of games played, and they will play one day and the next day and the next day, the playoff system works beautifully. And so the farther you get in the playoffs, the more exciting it gets. And you know, Griffin, what a great playoff that was. They got to the Elite Eight, you know, a couple of years ago. That's a great memory. Griffin may be the best I've seen.
On the baseline, Blake Griffin spins to his left, goes out of the basket and slams it.
I did not do OU during Wayman Tisdale, but Blake Griffin was just absolutely phenomenal athlete.
What about the year Oklahoma played Michigan State in one of the better Final Four games ever?
Well, that was when Nahara had
Yeah.
the collision with the star for Michigan State, and they both of them just bleeding all over the place. That was in Atlanta. That was Final Four. That's probably the most memorable, really. Glad you brought that up.
You talked about the BCS briefly. It was one of the things I wanted to touch on. So you're a proponent of it. Why? Why the BCS?
Well, let me just be the devil's advocate here. So what is the reason people want to have a playoff? Well, they want to have it structured so that we can really get the national champion. Okay, there are how many teams playing Division I football? 150?
Something like that.
Okay, who are you going to exclude?
Well, I think the argument would be you make the cutoff for the people who are pro playoff. You make the cutoff at 8 or 9 rather than 1 and 2.
What do you mean? Who's 8 and 9? Who determines that?
A ranking system of some sort.
Okay. What do you got right now?
A ranking system.
A ranking system.
No, I agree with you in that sense.
In other words, my point is, I'm not being snippy or sarcastic. There are too many teams to have a playoff in football because some way, somehow, somebody or some group has got to make a decision about which teams are in the playoff. And that's what you got right now. In other words, you can't just have all 150 play, or okay, we'll take the biggest conferences. Which ones are they? And if you're going to take 19 teams, what about the 20th team? Big argument. And people say, well, basketball does it. Do you ever hear an argument after they pick the selection Saturday or Sunday in basketball? Everybody argues this regional is tougher than this regional. Yeah. So you can't. There's just too many teams involved in football.
Everybody knows that sports broadcasting is a 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week job. So you did that along with broadcasting football and basketball. How did you balance that with your family life, raising your children, spending time with your wife? What was the balance like for you?
Well, that was pretty tough as far as the wife was concerned, because doing 5, 6, and 10 on TV, you're gone at nights, and then of course the travel and the play-by-play. So we worked it out very satisfactorily, and it's sometimes you never have the feeling, at least I never did, well, darn, got to go do a game.
Yeah.
You know, you're looking forward to doing the game. You love to do it, and yet my wife and I worked out. You know, we were together. We were married 50 years. She passed away, unfortunately, several years ago, but we never had that problem. She realized, getting into the marriage, that this character is going to be working at night a lot.
What is the best part of what you did for a living?
Doing exactly what you want to do and getting paid for it. I mean, that is what is it? That's not work. That's fun. Yeah. And I get this check, you know.
What's the worst part of what we do?
The travel. The travel really gets me in basketball, especially small planes, bad weather. The travel is really tough on you the older you get.
If Jack Ogle was in fact a modern day version right here in Oklahoma of Edward R. Murrow, well then Bob Berry Sr. was our own Howard Cosell. And you know, he just had that kind of spirit, and he's the best there ever was, and everybody knows that, and there'll never be anybody like him again.
The OU family, so many distinguished names. You've been a part of it for 30 years. What's it like to be in that family, to be one of the names that's recognized when people say OU football?
Well, it's great, and 97% at least of the people accept you, that even though you did OSU or vice versa, you have very little of that backlash. But it's you're honored to be associated with these great teams, and aren't we lucky to have two great teams like over the years, OU and OSU, and they've all had their moments, good and bad. But you know, I don't think you overstep. You don't profess to be, I'm part of the team. You know, yeah. You're not. You're a broadcaster, but you're, in a way, you're part of it because you're a homer. I admit that. You know, I'm not doing a network thing. I'm doing it for a certain team. So you're a little bit of a homer. For those viewing who don't know what a homer is, that's when you're biased toward the team you're broadcasting. And you have a little bit of that, but I don't know whether I've answered the question or not. But it's just you're doing what you love to do, and so it's fun.
What do you look forward to most? You've got just a short time left doing basketball. What do you look forward to most these last several weeks you have left?
Just look forward to doing it. I'm not sitting around saying, oh my gosh, only 3 more games or only 2 more. You know, I'm like I say, I'm prepared to do it. I love doing it, but it's time to move on.
Have you thought about what that last game is going to be like yet?
I'm not
concerned.
Not concerned at all, because like I say, it's not the end of the world. I mean, things go on. You know, you have to realize you're 80 years old and you've had your 50 years, and it's time to move on.
Anything you'd like to say to the people who have supported you for
these 50
years?
I'm just so grateful. Gosh, the ceremony they had at halftime of the last home game at OU was just unbelievable. I mean, there's no words to describe it, really. You know, you feel like, what? It's just wonderful. And Oklahoma State has been so nice. They had a little salute last game up there, and I'm just so thankful. And really, that's not anything but totally sincere. I'm just thankful for the fans and everybody else, even the ones that say you're a lousy announcer.
It's hard to say how we could quantify how much he'll be missed. You just don't replace a Bob Berry. You just don't do it. That's why we've said we're finding a new voice. We're not finding another Bob Berry.
Bob Berry will call his final regular season game Saturday, March 5th in Norman as the Sooners host, fittingly, Oklahoma State. It's been an honor to learn from him while interning in college and even through this process. Bob Berry's calls will be missed, but he will always be the voice of sports in Oklahoma.
45, 50, down the sideline, 45, 40, 35, 30, 25, 20, 15, 10, 5, touchdown, Oklahoma!
When they had the statue dedication, my statue, they played some pieces of when he called my games. And seriously, I get chills just listening to him.
It's kind of sad to see him moving on, because it's been so long, for so many years, that we've watched him.
He's had a great affiliation with both schools, done both schools a great job, and I know that he's proud of what he's accomplished in his lifetime.
Bob Berry and his family have been a big part of Oklahoma sports for our whole life.
50 years behind the microphone, a salute to Bob Berry Sr. with KSBI sports analyst Brian Burchell has been brought to you by Reynolds Ford, Terrell's, Bob Mills Furniture Company, Inc., Jersey Mike Subs, Land Run Records, Haven Wireless High-Speed Internet, Norman Regional Health System, Today's Children Child Development Center, and the Bird Law Firm.